Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you are watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. First hour is general discussion, anything you'd like to ask about media production or virtual production. The second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. Today, we're going to answer general questions, again, about audio, but really, we'll continue general discussion through the second hour. Let's go ahead and get started. Bill, what do we got?
Our first question this morning comes from Andy Korkendorfer in Vieira, Florida. And Andy says, do you have a recommendation for an online project management platform when collaborating on an AV design or build? And thanks.
I have to admit, it's usually some version of Google Docs. When we talk about online, we think about it and then we do something else. Go ahead, John.
That would be this, John. Sorry. This will be the last day of this madness. I apologize. Yeah. What's the tool that Mr. Barker created where you could build stuff?
Absolutely.
Share that with people, right?
Here to Record's gear, is great for an online. I haven't used it as much as collaboration, but definitely laying things out online. And Here to Record has gear, and what it does is it lets you build out all your wiring diagrams online. And so that's a great one to look at. Next question.
Moving on to Graham Cardwell in Belfast, Northern Ireland. And Graham says, can I use an analog audio mixer to help me hear myself on Zoom, or do I need a digital one? And what is the signal path I'm looking for?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
You can. I mean, it gives you flexibility, but it can be confusing if you don't stay on top of it. In my case, I come out of Zoom into a broadcast console, Wheatstone in this particular case, and it comes out of my Mac Mini to get there. And then when I bring it back into my ATEM, I solo that channel. So I basically have a mix minus without the mic feeding back through it. Works for me.
Good, Courtney.
I'm using an analog mixer, a cheap one at that, the Samsung MixPad, and it has a USB return to main mix, and so you have a separate control over yourself and the main mix. So I have a separate control over my side tone and the main mix, and you got to make sure that you leave the echo cancellation turned on in Zoom, otherwise it will screw things up.
Go ahead, Leo.
So you're asking about hearing yourself, which is side tone, and side tone, one of the key things with side tone is delay or lack of. So if you go through a digital mixer or an analog mixer and you have a delay, you will find it very confusing to work with unless you've actually been experienced on this and you've done it a lot of times. So actually it's better to have an analog one and do the side tone right at the beginning of your chain so you can actually hear yourself. Alternative is to not cover your ears, which is what I'm doing, so I can actually hear myself and still hear the call because it's coming in on these bone conduction.
Next question.
Tim Hopper in Raleigh, North Carolina is up next, and he asks, what are good resources for learning the ins and outs of ffmpeg?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, you could read the manual. There's a good ffmpeg documentation online that has links to all of those great examples and how to do it. And it's there for the taking at ffmpeg.org.
It's pretty dry. Go ahead, Bill.
Very dry.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think ffmpeg is still open source.
All the information's there, but it's like Go ahead. Keep going.
Yeah, I think ffmpeg is an open source thing that's been battled around for decades, which means that there will be whole communities of people who are really well versed in it. So if you find the right users group or the right website sources, you will find people who've been studying this for decades and are happy to answer every question you could possibly have. That's one great thing about those open source side of things.
Jan Ozer is a person that we ought to probably try to get on for a general streaming Q&A, but he's done a lot of work in ffmpeg and everything related to streaming media. So if you do a search for him, he does trainings, and he writes books, and he does a lot of things around streaming. So he's probably a good resource to look for. Also do a search on GitHub for Streamline. That's what Colleen Henry has put out, and it all works on ffmpeg, but it's really how to build your own 4K or 8K encoder that will and so putting that together will help you learn a lot. And we're gonna do streamline sessions in the next couple of weeks, and we'll start doing them probably once a week, like labs it'll most likely be in the evenings because that's when Colleen wants to do it. You'll learn more about ffmpeg and streaming, working in those labs than you'll ever learn anywhere else. I mean, having access to someone like Colleen answering questions will be key to the operation. Next question.
Tim Harper in Raleigh, North Carolina is up next. He says, how can I start tinkering with Dante without investing hundreds of dollars in equipment?
Jeff?
So I'd start for no money with the training on audinate.com, and they actually have some virtual models of the Dante controller software if you want to get into the behind the scenes. For low money, get Dante Virtual Sound Card, which turns the Ethernet port on your computer into a 64 in and 64 out audio interface. You do need a piece of actual Dante physical hardware to do clock, and probably your cheapest way into that is the Avio, AVIO interfaces, which they have analog in, analog out, digital I/O, and Bluetooth and USB 2-channel.
So good to have you back, Jeff. Go ahead, Craig.
I'm going to go with the less popular but still works for me option. The classes are a must in my opinion, but if you want to get into the actual patching and routing of stuff, I would do the software bundle of the virtual sound card and VIA, as much as VIA doesn't work for everybody. For simple setups and for learning, it's a great option. And when you buy it as the combo with virtual sound card, it's not that much more expensive, and it gives you a lot of ways to do the routing, and it gives you that clock.
Next question.
Our friend Vienna in Australia, who's joined us on the panel many times before, says, which industries and sectors do you predict will have the greatest uptake in AV technology and skills? Examples, I've heard that telehealth, remote education, and business meetings are all at the top there.
Go ahead, Leo.
So I predict that we're going to see quite a big uptake in support. So at the moment, when you do anything support related, you may call up a number. But people are now realizing that you can actually have support being delivered, both physical, with a screen as well. So that could be a really interesting way of doing it, and could be a differentiator for some people and some companies to actually be offering that. So you feel that you're more involved with the person that you're actually doing. You get much more empathy when you're, say, for doing an insurance claim and you're actually seeing somebody on the other end of the line. It could be a huge benefit because they never would have done it before, but now they're seeing it. Actually, it's really easy to do. So I would see a lot of things that you do transactionally, remotely, will start having a video element.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, we take a lot of visual cues when we're looking at people in the eye and we can see their response. I mean, it could go, problem with emails, you probably had one where it's gone horribly wrong because somebody misinterpreted your sarcasm. Sarcasm doesn't translate even with emojis on the internet. But as to Zoom calls or things like we're doing right here, during pandemic world, people are being forced to try it out and they're learning how to work with it. And I think it's going to be hard for some people to go back, particularly in the corporate side, where people are now enjoying the idea of working from home. So in my case, my main motivation to get into learning more and more about Zoom and participating in office hours has been, as a production guy, the materials that I was getting back from clients who were recording their Zoom meetings was horrible. It was lowest possible resolution, bad audio, bad lighting. All of those things have to be improved, and I think that the more people do this, the more likely that they're going to stay with it. But my motivation was mainly to try to do my best to help improve the quality of calls like Zoom or Teams and things like that.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
A lot of companies will have to, just like when social media, when Facebook just exploded, they have to figure out a social media manager. They're going to probably have to figure out a role for setting up some sort of audio video for conference calls. When it comes to telehealth or anything financial, that's going to there's going to be more security. You got HIPAA laws that you have to worry about. You've got the FCC to worry about, insider trading and things like that. So most likely all of that is going to be ported over to any types of service. So that means that new companies could spring up that could do this third-party connection between the person and the telehealth company or the financial person.
Yeah, I think education is going to be over the next decade, especially next year, will be a massive probably the largest financial opportunity. And I don't mean education, like K through 12, university, companies, everything over the next year, especially you'll see the spark. And then over the next decade, it's going to be massive because we have been constrained for decades with having to bring people into little rooms with 20 people at a time teaching them. And that's going to go away, all these software companies that would do that and all these other things to certify you and everything else, all of that's going to go online. And so I think that, and then we can do a lot of other things related to that. So I think education is probably going to be one of the biggest markets at all levels that's available to us because of people being at home. My wife just talked about the fact that she's going to some conference that she's wanted to go to for years because they now do it on Zoom. She was never going to make it. And I think that people are slowly realizing that a physical event excludes at least 99% of the market, the addressable market. Like a physical, that's, and it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but you should always know that you're basically throwing that at least 99% of your addressable global market away. And online events, as you get better at it, as we figure these things out, really includes a lot more people, and that's good for business. Next question.
Courtney Gooden here on the panel from Hollywood is asked, have any of the Down Under or Australian panelists, or New Zealand, I guess, heard anything about new hardware or software from BlackMagic Design since this week is the Virtual NAB?
Stuart?
No.
I was kind of surprised. I was expecting we were going to get, there's usually there's typically an update that happens today at NAB. And we haven't seen anything, so I'm a little unhappy. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I was told 2 weeks ago that BlackMagic wasn't even planning to attend, and so they made absolutely no plans to do any type of updates at this point in time.
I think a lot of companies would love to get out of the thing where they have to release things at a certain date. So breaking it up, I think, makes a lot more sense. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, it has to be that, because I'm surprised, because the BlackMagic original first day of NAB press conference was one of the great gathering places from everybody a lot of us know, because you'd see them all that first day of NAB meeting in the press room. And
great locks with bad bagels.
Yeah.
So
that's a good shorthand for it. Yeah.
All right. Next question.
Moving on, Vienna in Australia, is back with, speaking of Halloween displays, what's the most impressive and complex audio-visual display that the panelists have seen?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Well, there's one going around that's showing the Matrix, and the house is fully engulfed in the Matrix, and they're doing the openings, the last scene where Keanu Reeves is saying life is changing. But the cooler thing is I'm actually working on some stuff myself. Like right now, I got the front window and some stuff that John Pretto was talking about, and that's the display coming from a projector right now. And then I'm doing a lot of 3D printing of stuff that's going to be going in my front yard, which is really cool.
Go ahead, Stuart.
It's not specifically Halloween, but if anyone wants to Google White Night in Melbourne, which is N for night, not K, you'll find that the entire city used to get lit up with projection map displays across buildings all around the city. It was kind of a festival night, but obviously we can't do it at the moment.
Go ahead, Ari.
This is not Halloween at all, but there is a multimedia park in France, which I can't remember the name. I'll try and find it and put it in Mukana, but there's the most amazing, absolutely amazing display show of lights, lasers, fire, water, and audio. It was absolutely stunning. I'll try and find the name and put it in Mukana.
Go ahead, John.
John didn't want to show it, but I made him cue it up. Go ahead, John. This is an example of having two people in the same room actually works good. So John does a whole thing at his house. He was playing it on YouTube right there. I don't know that I've ever met anybody as into Halloween as him. And this is just he sets it up at his house every year.
So I have a question, John. Are you willing to come on and do a second hour about your house?
Sure.
Okay, let's do it next. We'll do it next week as we're getting ready for it, because your house is a whole second hour. So think about it this week, and then next week I'll ping you offline and we'll set up a day.
Sounds good.
It'd be great. Bill.
I just wanted to know. So my wife her parents next door to them, 2 houses down, was one of those monster Halloween houses. And every year they just used to go, we love it. The people are great. The kids are fabulous, but the traffic just destroys the neighborhood. So I was going to just suggest at the late in the process of them doing this, they actually had to hire valets, the people next door who were doing this, as part of their expense, along with the gigantic electric bill. They had to actually do crowd control and car control just so they wouldn't completely mess up the neighborhood. So these big displays can be fabulous, but they do kind of put a little infrastructure stress on some things.
The funny thing is that here in San Rafael and in Petaluma, there were a handful of blocks that got competitive, and no one else did it. Like it was a weird thing where almost everybody else, you just come and get candy, but there's like 3 or 4 blocks in San Rafael and 3 or 4 blocks in Petaluma where for whatever reason, those families decided they just keep trying to one up them. And I feel like they need to see John's because it could revolutionize the block because it's all physical, but it's really good. Like these people get, it's culture. Next question.
James Brooks in New York is up next, and James says, is there a difference between the encoder in the ATEM Mini Pro and the BlackMagic Design web presenter? If so, which is better? And he's looking to get a hardware encoder, and they're both roughly the same price, and the Mini Pro could do double duty. Thanks.
I don't think that there's any difference in the way that they process it. It would be very unusual for them to use a different chipset or different instruction set to do that. So I think between those two, because those are, I'm assuming you're talking about the 2 modern ones, that would probably be very similar, if not the same. If you're looking for a hardware encoder, I would also take a look at the Elemental Link. It's a little bit more expensive, but it uses Zixi, and it will be more robust in challenging situations. And it also just gets you into the cloud. You can do whatever you want. You control it. A lot of stuff. I use it a lot. Next question.
Kate Hustings in Sullens Grove, Pennsylvania says, what are the best hearing aids for someone who wears headphones for audio mixing?
I've often thought about some of our audio engineers and whether they needed hearing aids, as they're mixing, because they were at a lot of loud concerts, and sometimes you just feel like they can't hear that anymore. It's an odd thing to need. Go ahead, Bill.
Hearing aids is one of those industries. It's been going for a long time. At the top end, it can be very expensive, and I do think there's a lot of disruption going on. I've heard rumors for years that companies like Apple and some of the other big ones are doing a lot of research, and as they move more into human assistance with technology, the things like blood pressure monitoring, that they will continue to go into these medical or medical adjacent fields. And I think hearing is one of the things that is ripe for a revolution. The technology is there. It's used so much on all these in-ear monitors and things that you just need somebody to break that barrier between the medical side that's highly regulated and the consumer side that's not.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Haven't played with this yet, but apparently Apple has added in the accessibility features a correction curve for AirPods that you can load in. So I guess you get an app and you do a hearing test and load in a correction curve to your AirPods and AirPods Pros.
That's really
see if I can find a link on that.
Yeah,
that's very interesting. Good, John.
Yeah, me again. I think Apple's going to kill this. The latest firmware update for the AirPods Pro has an additional menu that you can dig down into, a huge bunch of corrections that you can do for how much, and it has like a focusing thing from the mics. I think Apple is going to revolutionize hearing aids.
For in-ear, and this isn't necessarily hearing aids, they do hearing aids. I've used a lot of Phonak, Phonak. These are used in both broadcast and security for wireless. Basically, when you see Jack Bauer, if you ever watch 24, put that little thing in his ear, that's a in-ear. Now, it doesn't go nearly as far as Jack Bauer's. Jack Bauer seems to work all over the city. This one goes like 30 feet, but it is very good for low profile in-ears. Next question.
Coming up from Simon Ray in Shrewsbury in the UK. And Simon says, can the panel suggest a LUT box with HDMI in and HDMI out that would allow you to shade a standard camera live like you can with the BlackMagic cameras?
So I know about how to do it with SDI, the SDI 6G, and I will do that. There's an SDI 6G from BlackMagic that will let you load a LUT. We just used it recently because we were matching a Sony camera to our BlackMagic cameras. I don't know of an HDMI to HDMI. Go ahead, Stuart.
I'm just wondering if we're confusing issues here with the question, because a LUT is a modification applied to the output, whereas shading a camera is changing the camera's settings inside the camera to get the best image. And it's a little bit of a
we've actually done it though. I
confusion to
mean,
do one the other way.
it actually works really well though. Not necessarily shading the camera, but painting the camera. So if you want to paint the camera going through, and where we've started to use this is in I have different cameras that are made by different manufacturers that all have their own color profiles. How do I pull those back in so that they look like they cut well together? And we've, after lots of trying to shade, I over on Sony, I got R minus G, G minus R, and B minus G, and then on BlackMagic, I've got a resolved look, and Panasonic's got a whole different one instead. Let's just put a box in between the camera and our switcher, and actually just put a LUT in there. And so you take that raw image, and then you call Charles, and then you have him look at it. You have to shoot a chart. That's where that Dumont chart becomes really useful, because you shoot the chart with all the cameras, and then you pull them all together using the lookup table, which is far more accurate than what you're going to get from a standard shading. Go ahead, Leo.
I thought I was hearing a discussion where you said that you can apply a LUT to the BlackMagic HDMI to SDI converters. And if you can, because the bidirectionals will allow you to go in on HDMI, out on SDI, but also out on HDMI at the same time.
I don't know if that out is a loop or not. I don't know if that out is a loop or not.
It will work as a loop. You can loop.
But I'm saying I don't know whether it'll apply the LUT in the loop. I know it'll loop.
Okay.
But I don't know whether it'll apply a LUT in that loop is the question that I have there. And I have one I could probably test it. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, that was the other question. The BlackMagic Video Assist 12K you can apply a 3D LUT, and it has HDMI ins and outs. So I'm wondering if it applies it to the output as well as the video on the monitor.
I think it actually does. I think that we've had that discussion in the past, but I'm not 100% sure because I don't have one yet. Next question.
David Brady in New York, another oft times panelist who isn't with us today, says, in a setup like John Pretto's, multi-participants and mics, what have been the biggest challenges beside talent wrangling, and what could be improved?
Chris?
It's this version of Pretto raising his hand. I could talk about this for a long, long time. Here's what I've learned. One, if you ever get the invitation by John to visit, he's a gracious host. Take him up on it. There has been a lot that I've learned in the last year and a half about what exactly friendship means. And it is incredible to be able to spend time with people that I'd never met physically before. That being said, technically it's a problem. It's absolutely a problem. And I also want to thank Alex for being patient. That I know that we've broken some rules here, and it's not the best situation for this presentation. But it can be done, but there are definitely problems with it. Multiple mics, people talking in the other room, the bird.
As if on cue.
The problems with, I'm learning a lot about having been sitting at the same computer for a year and a half. I've gotten very comfortable with my keychain and all my passwords, and that's why I'm logged in through John's Mukana, because I have no idea. I couldn't make it work. Anyway,
LastPass.
Whatever. It's been super interesting. It's been fun, but I realize it's problematic for the show, and I will be getting in my car soon and heading back to my normal place.
Rupert.
So just seeing Chris and John there together, pretty much side by side, in the lights and the party atmosphere, I'm just reminded of something like this. It reminds me of like a dual DJ gig.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the biggest problems, the technical problems, are really that the mics pick each other up. So having something like, a lot of times we want to have something like a Dugan auto mix that's going to push the other mics down when someone's talking. And so there's a technical issue with that. Number two is that creatively, this works because there's actually a space. A lot of times when you're talking about having a bunch of people in one place, they're talking to each other, and as soon as you have them at a table, it's no longer a one camera shoot. You now have to have 3 or 4 cameras so that you can get the right angles for everybody. Otherwise, it's really boring. And one of the reasons it's really boring is as soon as you put everybody in the same room, these guys are doing a great job at it, but usually they all look at each other the whole time, and that puts the entire audience on the outside. So those are some of the real challenges that you have to kind of figure out, is how do you pull the audience back in. And I have, after hundreds of events or thousands of them with this kind of thing, I haven't found the best way to do that yet. Because it's just, you feel the one way we've done it is making sure that some of the folks are on the other side, that they have a teleprompter, that it pulls them back in. But even then, it's a real challenge, and it's only done well by people who do it all the time. But especially when you bring in a couple executives who've never done it before, they just have a really hard time looking out at the screen. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, we've been well trained. I mean, we're all still muting our mic, so we don't have the Dugan issue. And from a physicality thing, I'm about probably 10 or 12 feet from John, and Doug's in the next room in the kitchen. But definitely those are serious issues. I've been giving the Alex Lindsay sermon about putting somebody in the middle of a conversation a lot lately. And you're absolutely onto something. This is the best way to communicate and share a conversation.
I mean, if you look at, we have 18 people here now. Imagine 18 people on a stage having a conversation. That would not work at all. I've done it. I've done 18, and it's horrible. Like not kind of like bad. It's like,
you've done 18 on a stage.
22 in a theater in London, talking about the future of the drug war or something. I don't remember. Rap. No, we were talking about rap. So it was a lot of musicians on stage, and it was chaos. Anyway, so
bunch of mic cupping like this.
Yeah, there was some of that. Anyway, so it was it was a complete mess. And so it's really, we've even gotten to the habit now where we go into places and we try to persuade people, let's just put everybody in a separate room and get them all, in their space. And I find myself, I really like this part of just having to manage this section of myself, and I don't have to manage. I wear shorts. So anyway, I like that. Next question.
Long pants optional. Tony Mobley in Noonan, Georgia comes up next. PR40 is out of sight. Will this work on conversations with Tony Mobley? It sounds pretty good during mic checks, and just wanted to make sure. Please share opinions. I think Tony sounded good in the mic check. But
you want to go ahead and talk a little bit, Tony?
Greetings, guys. I had a audit sort of in after hours, and Jeffrey Powers led the way with this new setup.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have reconfigured. So I am no longer looking up at the sky when I'm on camera. I'm looking directly at the monitor right now, but it should look like I'm looking at the screen or looking at all of you. So I am doing both at the same time. So that was the main thing. And Jeffrey had a real problem with my enormous mic showing up on camera. So,
and you go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, it wasn't about the microphone showing up on the camera. It was about the fact that the microphone was right there, and when the camera came in, it was like it was trying to focus more on the microphone than focus on Tony. So, and the problem is that Tony has this very short stand, so bringing it close to his mouth is super impossible. So we got it right about here on the table to his right, and as close as possible to his mouth, which does bring a little bit of room noise, but it's still pretty decent. And of course, he doesn't have the pop filter, which in that distance, you really don't need the pop filter for. But Tony, I think I know exactly where that arm is, and I'll be sending it your way so we can get that microphone closer to your mouth.
Hosmer?
Yeah, I probably look quite exhausted.
Hey, Doug, your mic's open. There we go. Go ahead. Go ahead, Hosmer.
I'm probably looking quite exhausted, and I'm wondering why. And Tony's question prompted me to think about it. For years, I've been falling asleep with BBC in my ear, and I've made a big mistake of falling asleep with after hours in my ear. So yesterday, I was listening to this banter between Jeffrey and Clark trying to help Tony. I couldn't help but go and switch on my phone and actually look at what they're doing because I was so intrigued. And so this is, I can't help Tony any further, but it's just a warning to everybody else. Don't go to bed with after hours.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, the other thing we did was we tried to level out those shelves because they're coming in at an angle. So I wanted to get them even. I was really hoping we could get a corner in there, but the corner that we could use has a TV and a fireplace mantle and looked really weird. So we were really trying to set up his small space, and which was tough, but it made me think of a lot of things. I got a few more ideas that we can definitely try.
And Tony, who do you have on tomorrow?
I have Mr. Todd Reynolds on for tomorrow.
Ooh, all right. And that's at 5 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. Is that right? 8 o'clock Eastern?
Yes. And interesting enough, there are some exceptional people that are going to be on the panel with Todd. And I think a gentleman from, let's see, a particular part of California that is often overlooked when people talk about California, but it's going to be a great opportunity for us to have a great conversation with getting to know who Todd is. And I think we have a supporting cast that will, give us a better picture. And that's part of what I try to do. I try, if office hours person is on Conversation with Tony Mobley, it's really not about the video production. It's really about getting to know who that person is. And that's what we try to do. Yeah. And so again, I want to thank all of you who have decided to accept position on the panel. Alex Lindsay, thank you so much. And Jeff Francis, and the list goes on and on. It's going to be a great panel.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Michael in Silverado, California, that's all we've got here, says, is it safe to start purchasing BlackMagic Design products now, or should we continue to wait?
It seems to be safe. I probably wait until the end of the week. Then after that, it's as safe as it's ever going to be. I mean, what you want to look at is how long has it been since they released the product, except for routers, which we've all given up on. We've given up that they're ever going to release another router. So, but a lot of the stuff, like a lot of the switchers, the gray switchers instead of the black switchers, are probably long in the tooth. You feel like they're probably going to get released, get unrev. So those are the ones that I would probably lean away from. But the kind of the switchers that are the black switchers are the more advanced panels, and they have the better keyers, and they have a lot of other bits and pieces to them. So I kind of keep an eye on that. But the cameras, I think, are probably safe. Any ones that were released in the last year. Next question.
Show friend Jonas Dattel in Stuttgart, Germany is up next with Alex. What do you think of Vimeo adding Dolby Vision? Will they also add it to live, do you think?
It's pretty exciting. So yeah, Vimeo now you can upload Dolby Vision video. I don't think it does Atmos. I think it's just video. But that is a big push forward of being able to actually post that there. Now, what I will say is that VOD is a lot simpler than live as far as how you handle specifically the manifests that you're delivering to people. The manifest is telling the player when you're watching it, this is what you have available to you. It's a lot easier to do that with post VOD than it is with live feeds. So I think that, and the other thing is that it would require Vimeo to revamp their entire live back end, to be able to support at least 10-bit, to be able to support all those bits and pieces. So I think that their audience probably would have trouble even producing the content, once they did it. I do think eventually they'll do it live, but there's not that many people that do it live right now. So I think that it would probably be too early for them to put that much engineering resources into it, because right now, I'll be honest, Vision really only works on the Apple products. It kind of works on everything else, but it's a painful experience everywhere else. And it's only because Apple spent the last 2 or 3 years working pretty heavily on one thing working, when it comes to video. So I think that for Vimeo, they'll need to see wider adoption, and we are seeing some of that. Lenovo, and there are some Android phones, and there's some other things that are kind of moving that direction. But I think it'll have to get wider before they put it into the live activation. But it's super exciting that it's available somewhere right now. Next question.
Peter Moore in Auckland, New Zealand is up next. He says USB Type-B interfaces are pretty much standard on keyboards and synths, mixers, and more, and recently on guitar amps to obviously allow for computer connectivity. Does anyone know why USB-B is the standard type there instead of the more ubiquitous Type-A?
Go ahead, Jeff.
A is what is typically on computers, and B is what is typically on the peripheral. So the keyboard synth doesn't have the smarts. So the computer A is the smart side, and the USB-B on the keyboard is the dumb client side.
Every once in a while, you get some product where someone decided to do A to A, and you're just like, what the what? Because the problem is you can't find the cables. So it's a painful. Go ahead, Leo.
Get out slightly further. So effectively they're gendered. So it is, you go A to B. It's not quite called that, but it's A to B. And as you look, the standard that we're all used to is the A on the left-hand side. And then it's either the B that is at the bottom there, or it's the micro B on the bottom right is the one that we're all used to seeing. And they have to go in the pairs. The difference is C. The new C is not, so you can. It's bidirectional in that respect. It can be plugged in either way.
Go ahead, Rupert.
We've covered it.
Next question.
Jason Bin in Toledo, Ohio is up next. Is there much difference in audio quality for Zoom, FaceTime, and so forth among the different devices in the AirPods lineup? For example, AirPods, AirPods Pro, or AirPods Max?
I think if you're using there's definitely differences in the AirPods themselves. I think that as you go up, you get better microphones. As far as the quality, if that's what you're looking for. I'm not sure whether you're talking about microphones or hearing quality. So I think that'd be the one difference that I'd kind of point out. The one thing that I have gotten into the habit of, my cell companies, I think as they move to 5G, have ruined the actual cell coverage in my area, and so I can't. My cell was working perfectly for 3 or 4 years, and now it doesn't work. And so I moved to FaceTime audio, which once you get used to it, now all cell calls sound horrible because you're just used to this nice crystal clear sound. And so I've gotten into the habit. Anybody who has an iPhone knows, if they've talked to me recently, that I'll call them on FaceTime audio because I like the sound a lot better. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, Apple normally does tons of research when they're doing a new product, and I think that the sound of AirPods have been designed to be one thing, and that is articulate in a telephone-type conversation. Because you think about it, people are going to be in traffic talking on them, literally walking down busy street corners. So I think they really looked at the mid-range and made sure that was crisp and perfect so that you get all the little phonemes of speech, the THs and the S's as clear as possible, but that makes them not real good for broad range, full spectrum sound. They're just not good at that.
Go ahead, Jeff.
If you're in a Zoom meeting, of course, you want to be in a quiet environment, but if you can't be, then the AirPods Pro, and I assume the Max, have noise cancellation, which is a great thing to have. So,
yeah, absolutely. Jeffrey?
Yeah, the noise cancellation means there's an extra microphone on each of the AirPods Pro as opposed to the AirPods, and I believe that the AirPods can't do Dolby sound. I'd have to double check on that. But if you really want to see what's on the inside, there's a whole bunch of teardown videos that you can look up for the AirPods Pro, and the AirPods Max to see what's in there.
Next question.
Nathan GS in Singapore asks, will any of the USB-powered 15-inch portable screens work with the ATEM Mini output for Multiview? Any models that the panelists here might have used or recommendations?
Go ahead, Jeff.
So I've been asking the same question. What I found is they will work. However, you're stuck at 60 or 59 frame rate. So they will not work at the 2997 or 30 frame rate. If you want that, then take a look at the 12-inch Lilliput.
Courtney?
Yeah, I agree. You might have to meddle with the frame rate. I found that these work. This is a Bio or 3IO Fun, Chinese names. But you'll find these under several different, you can tell because it has this hole in the corner. Same manufacturer with a different name on it, but they all have the micro mini HDMI and USB-C in, and that's what you'll have to use it with the ATEM because you got to power it separately.
Go ahead, Leo.
Well, the big problem, although you talked about just 60 hertz, for us that are in the 50 hertz and 25 world, they are a nightmare, because the minute you set your output to 50, as you need to, everything else starts, they start flashing. So be aware. I don't know what Singapore hertz are, but you may find they aren't suitable.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So I've been testing a few of these, of course, and I have right in front of me actually the ViewSonic, the TD1655. And the best part about this one, the TD, they have the VG and they have the TD. TD is the touch panel monitor, and the other one's just a straight up monitor, 60 hertz, exactly what they're saying. But I have hooked it up to my ATEM and I haven't had any problems with it. The other thing is, some of these other brands, they'll be relatively cheaper. We'll see a lot of Black Friday deals coming with those monitors, and then there's even one that's actually got a battery in it, and so I'm really excited to see how that one works.
Next question
comes to us from Vienna in Australia. Will any of the USB powered? I'm sorry. And now it just fits. How do the panelists delineate between the purpose of a MacBook M1 versus an iPad Pro with a keyboard? The gap between them seems to be closing.
Go ahead, Rupert.
So you can attach a keyboard to an iPad, but you cannot detach the keyboard from a MacBook. So if you are looking for a portable device truly that you can have in one hand and you want a tablet experience, that's one reason you're definitely going to go to the iPad route. And then there's plenty of use cases that support that in terms of enterprise field deployments where people, just need a tablet type experience. And if you either want or don't want to or need to be able to interact with an operating system, that might be another reason you go to a laptop. If you don't want that experience or that overhead, then another reason maybe to go for a tablet.
Go ahead, Bill.
To me, the difference is whether or not it's touch enabled, because obviously iPads are all touch-based operating systems. Computers, MacBook Pros and everything are not touch-based. So the MacBook M1. So in using my iPad Pro as a sidecar display here, I have to remind myself that I need to move the mouse cursor over to that screen to operate things rather than reaching up and touching, because suddenly its mode has changed for that. So if you're used to using touch all the time, losing that will be a little weird. And if you're used to using a keyboard and a mouse all the time, you have to get used to it if you change the nature of the device. To me, those are the splits. Do you mostly like touch computing or do you mostly like keyboard computing?
And I think that sometimes the apps themselves just aren't, like I use Keynote, for instance, on both, and I use them in very specific ways. On my iPad, I draw storyboard all my Keynote. Every slide I storyboard out. And then I move it to my Mac, which I then clean up, because my precision control, I feel, is higher on the Mac than it is on the iPad. And then I often present from the iPad because it's easier. And so there's so it just goes back and forth, and finding, I think that the motor skills of like how to use an iPad is still a little challenging, to get really precise stuff. Like I've tried to 3D model on an iPad. It doesn't work. like it's a cute idea, but I haven't figured out how to do that yet. Next question.
Justin Blankenship is up next from Lebanon, Virginia. And Justin says, what's a good video camera stabilizer to use on a tripod for decreasing or eliminating camera shake from low bass vibrations in a room? In our church, anytime the drummer hits the kick or bass, the bass player plays certain low tones, the video shakes.
Go ahead, Stuart. Stuart, can you hear us?
Look at that. I had everything set up. I had an example and I forgot to hit the mute button.
Go ahead.
But the point I was making was that bass is actually harder to eliminate because it shakes everything. It shakes the platform. It shakes the camera. It shakes the internals of the camera. It shakes the operators. Now, if it's just a small environment and it's a cheap solution you're looking for, you can get a base plate that's usually used on helicopter style drones that is a series of springs between two plates. This is an alternative. This is to replace the springs. It's just cables instead. All right, and that allows you to isolate the head of the tripod from the legs, and that will soak up some, but it will also introduce a little bit of movement as you push on the tripod head. Alex is going to tell you about floating concretes in sand, but I believe there's somebody else with another answer before that.
Go ahead, Jeff.
The company I've seen is Nigel B Designs, primarily for PTZ, but they do have some mounts that could just fit between the tripod and the camera itself.
Good, Bill.
I'm just going to tee up Alex by saying the only thing that really dampens vibrations and low frequencies is mass, period.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Another thing you can do is actually build, for the drummer, you can actually build a drum riser. You can actually use tennis balls or rubber balls underneath of that. That'll reduce the vibration on the rest of the stage. I wouldn't recommend it totally, because the one thing, especially going to electronic drums, I found was a lot of the other musicians didn't like the electronic drums because they couldn't feel the vibration of the kick drum. And that's the one thing I have not replaced in my drum set, was the kick drum. So the other thing is to just, in where the tripod is, figure out a way to isolate it. You can also put that on a riser with those same rubber ball feet and help keep the vibration out.
The problem with doing vibration suppression inside of the head is that when you move it, it's now loose. To make it so that it can absorb things, it's loose itself, and it has a kind of a very odd feeling to it. And so we've had trouble, making that work. PTZs work because they're just doing their thing, and they're not. But when you have a person moving a tripod, it's hard. As Bill said, what I learned how to do on a tour, a political tour, was to drop a 3-foot concrete block into 6 inches of sand, a box that held 6 inches of sand in the borders, and basically it would absorb everything. It was a big box, but it would absorb just about everything. And so, but we also put neoprene on it. And when we don't have that, neoprene is a couple layers of neoprene underneath it. Will do a lot of work. We've also taken tables, like just whole, just tables, and just stack them. The folding tables, just stack them all up. They add a lot of mass if you don't have the money to do anything else. And then you put neoprene on top of it, because the neoprene will take a lot of that tight vibration out of it. But putting it up on the head, we found to be hard when we had human operators, because it just gets wonky. I think it's a technical term for it. Go ahead, Courtney.
Now, this is just a thought or a concept, but I'm wondering if a camera that has optical image stabilization, it has the tiny little lens elements suspended on electromagnetic springs, and I'm wondering if the vibration is getting into there, so regardless of the amount of weight you add to your camera and everything else, it would still cause blurriness or image vibration.
Next question.
Next one comes from Jason Bin in Toledo, Ohio. He's back with
keep going. You're a little in the middle, but it's good.
Yeah, the Illuminarium attraction will be using disguise media servers. Being unfamiliar with that word, how do you control those servers? Are they controlled with like VTRs with RS-422?
Disguise is an entirely different level of projection. So it's basically designed to blend systems, as well as, and it gives you kind of a master template. We could probably bring the guys from Disguise on to talk about stuff, but this is a high-end presentation tool for projection mapping, and kind of lets you build a canvas that could go across, span multiple screens, or span very large LED walls, and then have video and effects and everything else being driven, to that. So Disguise is a very powerful, very expensive piece of hardware and software that can be used. It's not really RS-422 at this point. It's its own pipeline, and with their own operators. And so, but it's probably worth it. If someone puts it in the second hour, I'll reach out to the guys and see if they'll come on. Next question.
Cool. Nathan GS in Singapore is up next. He says, do the panelists prefer Rode PSA-1 style boom arms or the Elgato Wave Low Profile type arm?
Go ahead, Leo.
So the low profile arms are fairly new in the market, and they're changing the dynamics of what's happening. Why? Because people were used to bringing arms in over this way, because there was no screens there. There was no camera behind, and now we're suddenly finding that people have cameras there and they're looking at the presentation. So I'm on a low profile arm. It does show up just above my here, but it means I can still get complete access to my keyboard and look at my screens and look at my camera. And I think this is going to be a big change that we're going to see, and we're going to see these arms coming in more and more, especially once the gamers start seeing this. Some gamers that I know that have tried it have gone, oh, this is brilliant. It's much, much better. And also, as we know, microphones are getting heavier, and most of the other type, the boom ones are sprung loaded, and the springs are starting to suffer under the weight, and these ones are not.
Next question.
Jason Bin in Toledo, Ohio is back. Has a question for you, Alex. Some of the discussions he notes on MacBreak Weekly have become quite heated recently with you, Andy, and Leo. Are any of you actually upset with each other? And he hopes not.
Not at all. Andy and I talk all the time. But Andy and I love arguing. And so if we're within 50 miles of each other, we end up at dinner. And it's usually 3 or 4 hours of not necessarily as heated. But I think that, no, we're not upset at all. Like we have a good time on the show. We definitely have strong opinions, and we definitely don't agree with each other on certain subjects. And we're very comfortable with not agreeing with each other and still going out and it's like those two dogs remember when we grew up in morning cartoons where they're fighting during the show, and then they say, hey, let's go out and have a beer. I don't think they said that, but let's go out hang out together. But yeah, we're totally friends off air. Next question.
Hazma Kajar, our friend in Cape Town, who's here on the panel today, says, Charles provided LUTs for the two 6Ks for the cooking show. If I want to add an iPhone 12 Pro with Filmic, is it possible to match the 6K's color settings? And if so, how does he go about it?
You always match to the lowest common denominator. So you'd have to match the cameras to the phone. So you get the phone, you take a look at the phone, and you shoot it in a chart, an X-Rite or whatever, then you'll match your cameras to that. You get it to where you like it on the phone as best you can, and then go to that direction. But you always end up matching cameras to the one that has the least control. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, do you think crowd management skills will still have their place even as we move toward the digital first future?
Go ahead, Rupert.
I think they'll evolve like everything else, whether it's crowds in large numbers at big venues or just amounts of people in office buildings. I think we'll see more and more technology evolve in this space, whether it's backed with AI or augmented VR type monitoring. But looking at these, camera systems or just monitoring people movement, heat maps and capacities. So I think the skills will have a place, but the technology will just also evolve, and it'll be a augmented approach.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
In certain things, there'll be a direct parallel. I used to manage a charity beer festival, raising money for a good group of folks. And our biggest challenge, my biggest issue was getting people into the event, because we would have 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people lined up outside. We had to ID bracelet and verify their age and everything for that many and get them into the festival. You can see that with one of these massive online events, just checking credentials, making sure that they've paid or their whatever. There needs to be a system in place. And I did massive diagrams about how to pull people out of line who had an exception problem and move them over into another group so they didn't hold up the main lines, all of whom wanted to get in as fast as possible. There'll be an analog to that even with digital events.
Go ahead, Stuart.
Sure, as crowds get smaller, we're going to need less crowd controllers and security personnel, but it's somebody who's done this job before to make ends meet. The crowd controller doesn't just take care of getting people in and out. Their skills are also about quelling arguments between people and also providing first aid response to any incidents that happen. And there's a wide range of training that everybody gets to be able to deliver that. Those skills are still going to be needed anywhere there's crowds of people. So those jobs are going to be pretty stable. It's where the jobs above them in the chain are that things are going to evolve rapidly.
Next question.
Next question comes from Douglas Carmichael, frequent questioner here. In the promotional material for the Illuminarium, we're back with that, they talk about filming on location in Africa. Being that many vendors don't have a first-party presence in Africa, could there be issues relying on the local reseller or service organization for emergency support?
It really depends on the country that you're working in. There are some countries that have actually a plenty amount of production. South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya. Those are some of the ones, probably the leaders in the area where you end up with a lot of film support that's already there. Even that said, still production companies will tend to bring a lot of their own stuff just because they know it. Go ahead, Rupert.
So when I've traveled to regions in Africa, I was given a card, an international travel card with telephone numbers for pretty much every country in the world. And it's like, if you have a problem, you call this number.
Yeah, but it really depends. It depends on how big the media market is. I know when we got to Rwanda, it wasn't particularly large, and now there's a lot of cameras, and you can find Reds and BlackMagic cameras and lots of other stuff in Aries in Kigali. So it all just depends on how much work is being done and at what level. Next question.
Comes from Josh Kaufman, and I thought this one may be audio, but I guess we're going to handle it here. Josh asks, in audio, high pass versus low cut, is there a difference, or is it 6 in one, 6 in one, 12 minus 6 in the other?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Great phrasing.
High pass and low cut are the same filter, and these are filters that give us a flat 0 unity gain pass region, and in a low cut it is passing the high frequencies, and then it is cutting the low frequencies, and it cuts them more and more as you get farther away from the crossover point, which is the number that you see. If you say an 85 hertz low cut filter, that will cut at 85 hertz. It's already 3 dB down at that point, and then it will continue more and more, and the amount is described as either an order, as you saw in that graph, or more commonly as a slope, and that slope is 6 dB per octave per order. So you have 6 dB, 12 dB, 18 dB, 24 dB per octave slopes. So as you go an octave below 80 hertz, you're down at 40 hertz. You're another 12 dB down for a 12 dB per octave slope filter.
See, I knew our less articulate answers over the last couple of months would lure Jeff back in, and so he finally has to set us all straight. That's perfect answer. Go ahead, Kenneth.
Speaking of less articulate answers, it's a semantic difference, and it depends often on what the writer wants to convey to you. You'll often see microphones with low cut on it rather than high pass, designed to do the same thing. It depends on the thought.
Last question of the first hour.
Comes from Justin Emanuel of Staten Island, New York, and he says the preferred low or no cost software for remote offsite access to Macs other than the Chrome Remote Desktop.
Apple Remote Desktop. So that's a screen share. I think that would be my low cost solution. You can do screen share over an internal network, but yeah, if you want to get across networks, you have to now start thinking about. I don't know. AnyDesk is something that we've used a fair bit for that. TeamViewer, I will say, I believe has more features and is more stable and easier to use. Just really expensive from my perspective. So for what it does, so that's the. But I think those are the ones that we've used. All right. Let's change gears and switch over to a general audio question. So we've got some great audio folks here. And so if you have questions specifically about audio, go ahead and throw them in now. We've got a stack that's started, but I don't know if we have enough to get through the whole hour, or we'll just have to talk a lot about the ones we have. So anyway, let's go ahead and jump into it. What's the first question?
First one comes to our friend Vienna, and she's back with, what's the difference between regular earphones and in-ear monitors?
Go ahead, Bill.
So first and foremost, stealthiness. If you want something, obviously most headphones are obvious that someone's wearing it, changes the look, which is why you don't see them as much when people are on camera. The other thing is the size of the drivers themselves. There's been incredible technology improvement in the tiny, tiny drivers in in-ear monitors, and some of them are remarkably good now. But in the early years of audio, the fact that you had a inches large, or at least most of that diameter in a headphone, meant that you could get a much richer and fuller bass sound from them than you could. Now, again, technology has increased so much that there are in-ear monitors now that do a fine job with bass. But those were the reasons that kind of came up. You had two paths to get there.
Good, Leo.
So Bill's talked about the technology, and I would agree with all of that. What I would also say, though, is that the experience and what people are getting used to has changed. People are actually getting used to seeing things of people wearing in-ear monitors or something similar more and more, or the ones that I'm using, which are the bone conducting ones. And it's becoming familiar to people to see people on screen wearing them. And the compromise is there. I would say, though, with many of them, if you're sitting there listening to music, sometimes you'll sit there and go, you're not getting the full experience with some of the in-ear monitors. And in fact, some of them are actually designed not to, particularly ones that are used by some musicians, so that they are only listening to certain audio parts of the audio.
And there is a difference because musicians have one set of in-ear monitors and broadcasters have another one. Broadcasters lean towards low profile, and musicians just lean towards it sounding, isolation and it sounding good when they're actually playing. And it's two different worlds, but they both are in-ear monitors. The biggest difference that I would say is that one goes up over your ear and in, and the other one goes straight up. So if you see a headphone that goes straight up, it's designed to be listened to from the front, that's typically what I would call headphones, in-ear headphones. In-ear monitors will have a loop, either typically a metal loop, but sometimes just a soft loop. That's really designed, the way it's designed is to go over, like the ones that I'm wearing right now. These ones are, these have a metal loop to them that goes over the ear, and then in. And so with those kinds of different loops, that tends to be how we define that, is because they're designed to kind of run down your back as opposed to up your front. Next question.
Moving to Nathan GS in Singapore. Nathan says, what can you do to mitigate noise issue arising from long audio cable runs into the ATEM Mini?
We're going to do an undefined state. Let me push that back.
Yeah, that's weird. It's good on the prompter, but yeah.
Interesting. All right. Go ahead, Ken.
Well, the standard answer in this kind of case is do not do this. However, when one has to do this, use the shortest possible cable. Yeah. And when you can't use a short cable, depending on what the source is, which we don't know, arrange the source to be line output rather than a microphone level output, and find yourself a matching transformer somewhere. They're not impossible to find. And in a pinch, you can use a direct inject box, a DI box, backwards. And that will take a line level XLR cable and give you a 1/4-inch phone plug, which you can then use a short patch into an 1/8-inch phone plug into the ATEM. Understand, however, that the ATEM input needs to be adjusted for line level, and the socket is not balanced. It's stereo unbalanced. So if you get all that stuff right, you're on your way.
Go ahead, Jeff.
I would use Dante, and I would put a Dante Avio digital to analog converter and a very short XLR to 1/8-inch adapter close to the ATEM Mini. That's actually what I found to be, it was actually quieter than running line level audio into a Canon camera, which had Pro XLR inputs. It's a couple dB quieter.
Interesting. Bill?
We used to move all audio in an analog fashion, and back in those days, balanced cables were the solution for many of the noise problems. Now, a lot of things are moving to digital now, and this does not work the same way in digital. So the phase reversal trick that all old mic cables used to use in a balanced system, which is 3 conductors, and then 2 of them become out of phase at the point after a long run, and that suppresses any noise that was induced in the line through any electrical signals or things creeping into the whole line. That all in the analog world was critical to have working correctly if you wanted quiet audio and to eliminate noise along the way. So if you have balanced legs anywhere, make sure they're properly balanced and working correctly. When you get to digital, all that goes away because it doesn't use the same technology.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I think Jeff Francis's solution is probably the best. But if you want to use analog only without going to Dante, there are several balanced, unbalanced line level converters. So you want to stay balanced to as close to the ATEM as you can, and then take these RCA outputs that are on the output of this unbalanced side and run them into the stereo input. Make sure your ATEM is set to line level to get into the stereo.
Next question.
Nathan GS in Singapore says, any possibility of exploring all the audio settings within the ATEM Mini, maybe in a lab or second hour session? And for example, he'd like when to use the audio expander gate and EQ settings.
If someone puts that into the second hour and we vote it up a little bit, I'm happy to. I think audio in an ATEM an ATEM Mini specifically would be a great second hour. We just need to have a couple people who want to talk about it. So we'll find the right people to. If someone puts that into second hour, have the folks that are interested just put their hand up there, so I know who to contact. We'll make sure that the right people are there, because I have to admit that in ATEMs in general, I don't use the audio very much, and so I'm not familiar with it enough to know. I always get the audio on the other end. Next question.
George Saida, maybe Webster Grove, Missouri, says, any problems routing unbalanced audio out from several Moog semi-modular synths to a Nutric balanced patch bay with balanced patch cables? The signal goes via balanced lines to a Scarlett 18i8 and then a digital audio workstation, and balanced or unbalanced lines from the Moog into the system.
Go ahead, Jeff.
So first of all, the caveat that you should keep unbalanced lines as short as possible. Assuming you're all within a studio, you can probably get by doing this, and you're fine going through a balanced patch bay. I would keep all of the cables, use balanced cables all the way through it, except at the very start at the Moog, where you're going to have an unbalanced connector coming from that. And there, of course, you want signal wired to the hot, and then you would take the ground of the unbalanced and wire it to both the cold and the shield of the unbalanced cable.
Greg?
Yeah, I just reading this and hearing it read out, it sounds like he's saying it might be able to do balanced lines out of the Moog. Regardless of what cables you're, I don't think so either. I'm just the way that it reads. But regardless, and the wiring that Jeff said is spot on, of course. But just remember, it doesn't matter whether the patch panel is balanced or not. The signal is going to be unbalanced all the way through until you either balance it with a DI or it gets into the Scarlett through the mic pre's to the input section.
Yeah, I think Jeff said it earlier, which is one of the key rules here is anytime you have an unbalanced leg and you can't get rid of it, make it as short as possible. Get that signal from unbalanced to balanced as if you can do it right next to the device.
I think that what Craig points out too is that it needs to be balanced at some point. I think that was a really good point there, is that you come out, if you start running through a bunch of other things, even if they're balanced connectors, they're not balancing the signal, I don't believe.
Correct.
So unless Jeff wants to correct me, he has a look on his face that he might want to say something else.
No, I was reading something in Makana.
Okay. Go ahead, Courtney.
Depends on whether you got balanced cables. He says mention balanced cables, but a lot of the Moog cables are just tip sleeve, no ring. And if you're in that situation, you're plugging into the Nitric patch panel, you might try plugging it in partway, so it just hits that first detent that will unbalance it, send it into one feed of the...
But you can get cables that will do that, right? I mean, you can get a TS to TRS cable, I believe, and then that will do that for you without you having to have it halfway in.
You can, but that's a solution if all you have is...
If you're in an emergency situation, you can pull it part way out, but
part-way in. Yeah.
It's no way to live. It's no way to live. That's all I'm saying.
Detent, and they'll stay there.
I've had a couple people, in production, I've had a couple people pop it out like in a show. They're like, oh, I could pull it partial way out. And all I thought was, I'm not having him do audio again. So anyway, now next question.
Tony Mobley in Noonan, Georgia is up next. Can the panel talk about side tone, not just people? He's just not sure people understand the importance of hearing yourself. It's a game changer for him.
Go ahead, Leo.
Okay, so we've all grown up listening to ourselves. Some of us hear ourselves more without even talking. But the key thing is that you're actually listening and you're hearing yourself at a certain level. When you go and use a mobile phone, the big reason why people shout is that they're not hearing themselves back. And there's lots of other examples of that. You put headphones on people and they will start shouting because they can't hear themselves at the level and the tone that they're used to hearing. So there's two ways around it. The first way is side tone. So you actually hear yourself straight back into your ears at the level and you're able to adjust. The second is that you have a lot of people, you'll see them take one ear off so they actually listen that way, or you have these sort of bone conducting, so my ears are there. But it is critical to be able to hear yourself to regulate your voice at the level you're expecting people to hear you at. And when you can't, as for example, in car phones, that's when people start shouting.
Good, Bill.
Yeah, the other thing that's become, I think a lot of people understand now because we're in the Zoom era, is if you have your computer speakers on and you go into a Zoom call or something like that, and your speakers are physically putting out sound, that sound will also get into the microphone that you are talking into. And in the worst case scenario, you will get a true feedback loop. And anybody who's ever been during a sound check where they were ringing out a big system, and feedback can be incredibly painful. It's really distracting, and it's something you just want to avoid at all costs. So these technologies, including Zoom that we're using right now, suppress that open speaker thing through technology. And headphones, some way to monitor directly, is a key. And side tone helps you understand what you sound like as well as what you're listening to from the other people.
Good, Courtney.
And yes, if you're using a mixer or something, which an analog mixer where you're adding effects, you won't be able to hear them if you're adding them to yourself. If you don't have side tone. So the side tone really helps in that effect. And or if you're doing equalization or compression, you get to hear that equalization and compression before it goes out.
Next question.
Chris Weiner in Lafayette, Indiana says, which would be better, the Rode VideoMic Go or the Rode VideoMic NTG, the Rode Go 2? I need to use my second transmitter as a podium mic, or is there a better looking solution under an Alex in cost?
I haven't used the VideoMic 2. The Rode Go is relatively, or the Go 2. We haven't used those video mics. I guess as a second, I think Rode does a pretty good job of those types of mics under an Alex, which is $700. And so there's not a lot of competition down there that Rode hasn't done pretty well. If you're looking at the same form factor, I don't know if anyone else can think of a better one, but I think it's probably a pretty good solution there. Next question.
Okay, next question comes from Douglas Carmichael, and Douglas says, the Disguise Designer software and many other graphics applications seems to be Windows only. Being a person that has grown up with Mac OS, is the Windows audio world as inflexible, for example, no audio hijack, loopback equivalent, and so forth, as I've heard?
I don't think so. I mean, I think that you actually have a lot of options. There's this potato, right? The whatever it is. Voice meter potato or whatever. So you have lots of vegetables you can use to do it. I think that especially in the pro area, Windows has done pretty well actually of having some pretty high end audio tools that are very flexible. So I don't think that it's necessarily. I think that Apple does kind of prosumer rerouting maybe a little better, mostly just because audio hijack and loopback exist. If you took that software out, they'd probably be pretty equal. Next question. Go ahead, Courtney. I missed you there.
Yeah, I was just going to say there are a lot of options on Windows. The reason you see a lot of stuff for the Mac in the audio world is because of the Core Audio. When they went to Core Audio and they published that standard for all software you use, it makes a single interface, so it's much easier to write for the Apple side because you've got one set of hardware. In Windows, the sound cards are not defined, so you could have 50 different manufacturers of sound cards, and the interfaces can be different, and writing for them can be different. So you'll find a plethora of software, but it may not be compatible with whatever Windows hardware you have.
You find that I find that with Windows, they spend all their time writing. They have to spend all their time writing everything so directly that they just don't have time to spend any time on the interface. So usually it's just like, okay, we're done. Like that's all I can think about is how to get this actually working. When we used to write for, we had a Windows and a Mac software. Conduit was on both, and Windows was painful. And it's not because it's so. What Apple does, especially in the AV arena, and now they're doing 3D with the support of USDZ, with the support of some of the other things that they're doing, they give you a library that all you have to do as a developer is say, just go get that, go get the video, go get the audio, go get this, and all of that stuff's handed to you, and you're not writing it from scratch. And that's why there's so many things on both iOS as well as the Mac that work really well in those pipelines because Apple's built a bunch of libraries that you can just call rather than write. Next question.
Seven Scroll, our friends in Brooklyn, New York, up next with, for a virtual cooking show where the talent is moving around the frame, would you still recommend wired monitors or Bluetooth? And if wired, how would you rig it?
Go ahead, Bill.
I wouldn't recommend Bluetooth. Bluetooth tends to drop out and it has some issues. Even if sometimes your body gets between the Bluetooth transmitter and the receiver, you can get little dropouts. And wired generally doesn't work. That's a little bit dangerous. The traditional solution for that is basic traditional belt pack wireless into an in-ear monitor, and we call it IFB, interruptible foldback. That's what happened in TVs for the weatherman to get cues from the director. But that back and forth audio feed back to the talent live so they can monitor things through a standard wireless body pack system is kind of the standard. And one great advantage to it is that you can protect those transmitters and even the mic capsules from things like heat and grease and stuff like that you find in a daily cooking show, and they're available to be cleaned and sanitized, and that's much better than the little cheaper solutions.
Yeah, I will say, assuming that what you're talking about is the transmitters and receivers, there's a lot of stuff that I probably wouldn't use in a professional environment, but at home, 2.4 and 5 gigahertz transmitters like the Rode Go, and there's lots of little ones that do that. When you're only jumping 10 feet, almost everything works. What you want to do is reduce the amount of distance that the wireless pack has to go. I got some ones that are called, I've been testing. Hold on. Like these ones. Oops, I grabbed a Rode. Hold on. I've been testing these ones that are Beatron. It looks like a Rode Go, except it's like $60. And I've been testing these in my kitchen. They work great, because they only have to go about 10 feet, and so they're relatively inexpensive. I'm more apt to do this with headphones than I am with your mic, because your mic, you want a higher level transmitter. But we've used the Rode Go 2s, both for mic and transmitter in kitchens. We did use it a bunch for Mad in the kitchen, and we use it in other things, and they work great because, again, you're not at a very large distance. The only thing to know is that, assuming you're cooking without a microwave, your Rode will be affected by the microwave. Just in case, not that I've had that experience already. So you turn the microwave on and suddenly all kinds of things happen. So you just got to be careful of that. Next question.
No popcorn at the same time. Jason Robert Shaw.
Oh, buddy, do not eat microwave popcorn. It's horrible for you. Anyway, sorry. All right, next question.
Jason Robert Shaw in Sarasota, Florida is back with part of the 3.5 millimeter tip broke off inside my 13-inch MacBook Pro. Ouch. Easy fixes without tearing it apart.
Go ahead, Leo.
Follow some of the videos of how doctors remove things from kids' noses. It's a very similar exercise. And typically one of the ones that they do is they use glue, super glue on the end of a bud or something like that. Very carefully put it in, wait for it to dry, and then pull it out. There's a couple of also videos on this on YouTube, and you'll go down a very big, deep rabbit hole.
Go ahead, Jeff.
So Leo beat me to the super glue technique. Very tiny tweezers, if you could get in and grab that. Also, probably what's broken off may have a slight hole in the center of it. So if you could get a tiny drill bit inside there to get a little bit of grip and pull that out. It's probably going to spin. That's the trouble.
Yeah. Craig?
I had the same thing happen to me. What I ended up doing was getting one of these little USB sound card plugs, cheap and cheerful, but it works. My only concern with sending something in the hole to try and extract the tip is that there's a lot more pins, a lot more contact points on the side inside the plug inside for all the different things that you can put into it. Most MacBooks until I think maybe 2017 also had an optical on the center pin, but they've got the tip ring sleeve plus whatever other sensors they've got to know what you're plugging in there. And if you try to pull something out by using tweezers or whatever else, just be careful you don't trash any of those pins, because one of mine, when that happened, now thinks, even though there's nothing plugged into it, is permanently thinking that it's got something digital plugged into it, and you can't use it.
Courtney?
Yeah, I would avoid the super glue method, because you will contaminate the other contacts with the super glue, and once you get insulation in there, it's not going to, the other contacts are not going to work. So And also, if you be careful if you push something in there, and if it depends on the type of jack they were using that year, it's possible to push that little metal piece and it'll go inside the laptop and then rattle around, and that will short things out and blow things up. Take the back off and try and fish it out and try and get it out that way.
Go ahead, Stuart.
2 notes. One is these things, the tip is a cup for metal. So you need a set of reverse action tweezers. So instead of closing down when they clamp on the inside of an object, so they open out as you squeeze the handles. The second thing is, it sounds like a good opportunity to buy a PC.
Go ahead, Kenneth.
Refurb-tracker.com is my solution there.
Very good, Bill. Real quick.
Yeah, I go to iFixit and look at some of their speaker replacements for MacBooks. And the reason I say that is because they have detailed opening up and getting into things. And sometimes just watching one on something adjacent to the part you want to click will teach you a bunch about how hard it is to get to and whether there's an internal way to do it.
I think for me, it would be depending on how old my MacBook is. If it's really old, then I would probably do tweezers or something like that. If it's fairly new, I would take it to someone who can be held accountable if it doesn't work. So they'll have a different set of tools typically to make that work. Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. Any tips for someone new to using a Scarlett Solo and about to plug it in for the first time?
Jeff?
Be sure your monitors are turned down before you plug it in. The Scarlett Solo has 2 inputs. The left one, input number 1, is an XLR designed for microphones, so it's going to have the most gain, and it will provide phantom power. The second input can either do instrument or line level. So line level is typically going to be balanced, and it's going to need less gain. If you're coming from a line level source, you should be unity gain. And then instrument is for instruments, electric guitars, electric basses. It's going to be a really high impedance and typically unbalanced. And there's this button on there to switch that input from line to instrument.
Next question.
Comes from Tom Chatsworth in El Dorado Hills, and he says, open versus closed back over-ear headphones. What are the applications for each?
Go ahead, Jeff.
I like open for when I don't need isolation. They tend to be more comfortable and easier to listen to for long periods of time. Close back when you have to be in noisy environments and hear what's going on.
Go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, that's basically it. The only thing I'd add is the nice thing with the open backs is not just that they're more comfortable. Part of what makes them more comfortable is you get a little bit more air movement around your ears. So if you're wearing them for a long time, I find closed backs make my ears uncomfortable from just lack of oxygen.
Good, Courtney.
Open if you have to have somebody come up and whisper in your ear during a production and you have to be able to hear them. Closed if you're listening to anything with a delay on it and you're close enough to hear the direct sound as well, so you'll be able to differentiate, and you'll be able to seal out the direct sound and only hear the over-the-ear earphone sound.
Next question.
Stefan Fischer in Würzburg, Germany says, I failed with a search for an affordable send and receive device to manage in-ear monitoring and a microphone in one box. Technicians told me sending and receiving in one item does not do good anyway. Why? And any old wireless phone works that way.
Good, Bill.
So I think you're talking about duplex. There are devices, and I would send you to the Rolls Corporation. They make a variety of boxes, including boxes, and I use one on my voice booth where you can plug a microphone and plug an earphone. You have front controls over the level of both of those and then send that signal out to various things. That may be doing what you're trying to do. If you really are trying to mux both into a single thing, yeah, that is more complicated. It takes more electronics, but there are tools for that. So look at Rolls. They're good guys. I think they're in Colorado or Utah up in the Mountain West.
It just depends on the
responsive.
It depends on the price that you're looking at as well. I mean, the Mix Pre technically will do exactly what you're talking about. It takes the mic in, and it also gives you a side tone and in-ear monitoring from the far end. Also, in the hardware that we've used a lot are MM1s. These are sound devices. I don't know if they've updated them anytime soon, but they will do all of that in analog, which is they'll convert your mic to a line output as well as they will. Give you have an in-ear opportunity there as well. Not side tone, but in-ear, so you can get a return signal. If you're looking for wireless for that, the only one that I've used successfully is the Microflexes from Shure. They are these tiny little belt packs, and they'll have a TA4, which is the Shure microphone input, as well as an 1/8 inch out. And you can have 2 IFB signals across your chain. So you can have one for the host and one for all the guests or whatever. And you can have, I think, up to, I don't know how many. I mean, I think we've used more than 8. And so they're expensive, but they will work. And they're using the DEC platform. Next question.
Dan Meliska in Nelson, British Columbia says, in Final Cut Pro, an opening and closing clip with music was added to a main dialogue clip from a Sony AX100. Final edit exported to an MP4. On some computers, the opening and closing clip plays fine, but the audio from the dialogue clip is silent. Any ideas why?
The polarity is off on one of the inputs, so they're out of phase. So basically, they're basically doing the reverse of a they're doing the reverse of a balanced audio. So essentially what happens is that they are, one is inverted from where it should be. And so when they get summed back together, they basically eliminate anything that's on both lines. And so where you will hear it on some computers, the reason you're hearing it is because you're hearing it in stereo. So as long as you hear it in stereo, especially headphones, it'll sound fine. If you listen to it on anything that sums it to mono, like a phone, and oftentimes some computers, the dialogue will disappear. And someday I'll tell you why I know this so well, but I still can't talk about it. Go ahead, Stuart.
Yeah, we just need to correct one thing, both from this answer and from one that Bill said before. We've said out of phase, but it's actually out of polarity.
I said polarity at the beginning.
Polarity is a negative image of the sound rather than being slightly out of sync with each other, because one will cause more noise.
Yeah. Go ahead, Bill.
Fair enough. In the other thing, I think Alex is probably 100% right, and that's the way to solve it. But there is one other circumstance, which is when audio comes in as a muxed file into Final Cut, it keeps the left and right channel. So if somebody recorded the voiceover on the left channel only, and they have not moved that clip into what's called dual mono in Final Cut, it's possible that when it gets to the other end of that, somebody is monitoring the channel that has the music but doesn't have the voice because they didn't take care of those assignments properly in the early stages of Final Cut. So just look at that too.
And where we see it in production, by the way, is when we talk about polarity, is that they're the pins in an XLR, and where we got into this trouble is that somebody miswired those pins, and so they had 2 of them reversed, and that put the polarity out of it, and so it's really in the system. It wasn't like a digital thing. There is a Leisure meter. You can your audio through that Leisure meter, which you can find on a variety of audio tools. It will, if it's pointed straight up, the polarity is correct. If it's pointed at a 90-degree angle, the polarity is incorrect, and that will tell you exactly whether you're on the right path or not. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yes, and Stuart, out of polarity is 180 degrees out of phase, so it can be both.
It's a little bit of both. Next question.
Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania says, can the panel give advice for EQ settings for the purpose of enhancing voice intelligibility? Will this process vary depending on the speaker, the source, or will a general EQ work? And are there other tools that are built for this purpose?
Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, generally speaking, the human voice is between 800 hertz and 1,000 hertz. And you want to put a couple dB right there, not too much. And maybe a little bit around 2K and a little air around 12,000 hertz. That's general. It depends totally on the source of the room, and you may want to roll off the low end frequencies, maybe around 30 or 40 hertz, so you don't get that bass rumble in case they're hitting the microphone stand or something like that.
Good, Bill.
All those things that Michael said. There's also the circumstance where it is, I analogize it to cooking. You know, if you're starting with something salty, like a salty pork, you're not going to add more salt to the mix. So each voice comes in with its own characteristics. Some people have boomy voices, some people have splashy S's, and each of those signals is going to require a little different EQ to sound right. And you just have to understand that the more you cook, the better you get with adding the right spices and the right amounts That's what EQ is.
Never thought of EQ as a salt to taste, but it's
it
true. It is. Yeah, Courtney.
Yeah, as far as the human voice intelligibility, I'd say 4,000 to 6,000 hertz boost, about 3 to 5 dB will help with that, and low frequency attenuation, low high pass filter or low cutoff will help in intelligibility as well. And if you have sibilants that can confuse you, you could roll off a little bit at 15,000 to 12,000, somewhere in there.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, says, how do you keep a pair of molded in-ear monitors clean and sanitary? Are there specific cleaning tools for IEM use?
Some of it depends on whether they have their own filters or not. Some of the in-ears will have a filter that you can pop out and replace. But in general, it's alcohol wipes, or you kind of sit there and wipe them relatively often. I recommend to keep them clean. But alcohol is the thing isopropyl alcohol is what you want. Next question.
Next one, Christopher Sabato in Salem, Oregon. And he says, what are the options for an affordable, that's under $1,000 or around $1,000, multi-channel I/O audio snake over IP? I need at least 4 analog ins and 4 outs on each end. The 2 ends are connected by a fiber backbone and go through several enterprise Cisco switches.
Trying to think of the affordable. The affordable part is where all of us are like, So there's a couple different studio sound devices used to make it, but Studio Technologies makes one that's 4 over Dante. So it's 4 each. I believe it's 4 each way on Dante that you can look at. You might want to look at some of the Avio line. You might get a couple of them. There's a couple in that area as far as Dante. So it's over IP. That's IP. So but that's the ones that I know the best as far as what we've used for that. Multi-channel, 4 analog in and out is not that much. So, but I think that some Avios would probably get you under $1,000. You could go both ways. It would be close, but you could do that if you wanted to. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael wonders, the theater show Simon and Garfunkel's Story, he has a link there, has a full live band playing their songs, and there's a quote, I guess, from their promotional material, just like the album. He wonders, without access to the multi-track tapes and the session notes, how would you replicate the album mix on stage live?
There's a lot of people that are really good at that. So cover bands are really good at kind of breaking that all down and figuring it out and figuring out exactly what happened in the back end, and then they might tweak it a little bit themselves. But there are some cover bands that if you closed your eyes, you'd have a hard time telling the difference between them and the real thing. Especially in a live environment, it is you're not matching the studio 100%. Go ahead, Craig.
Even if they don't have access to the tapes, they probably there might have been charts, and a lot of the players that played on it are probably still around. There's lots of other material they can use, and the session notes from the engineers.
Go ahead, Bill.
I'm sorry we've lost Jeff, because Jeff would probably have some great notes for this, being a musician who works in studio circumstances a lot. But it's going to come down, I think, to arrangement and it's possible to make something sound a lot like an original without doing it the same way the original is. Will it be perfect? No, but for most people enjoying a theater performance, I think they'll get really close with good musicians and good audio.
As an aside, as a learning tool, copying other people's work, not as a production, not as a way to make money. I mean, in this case, it's all licensed, but as a learning tool, copying somebody else point by point is a great way to learn how to do something. I do it a lot in graphics where I see something. This is how I got into graphics, is I would see motion graphics that I thought were really cool. And then I'd sit down in Electric Image and After Effects, and I'd sit there and try to figure out how to do all the little things. And see that little thing. And I'd play mine right next to theirs, frame for frame, and see what they were doing versus mine. And it was incredibly difficult to get it just right. Now, did I ever use that for a client? No. but it's a great way when people talk about how do I learn how to do graphics or how do I learn how to do audio, try to reproduce something that you hear or see perfectly. And the closer you get to the perfection, the more you're going to learn, and then ask questions on how to do that. Because it's that reproduction is what we do as kids, and it's how we learn a lot, is to replicate other things. I don't think that's the great way to be creative, and that's not what you want to do. But I mean, remember that the Beatles played 1,000 shows of other people's music before they started writing their own. Next question.
Peter Moore in Auckland, New Zealand says, can we have a second hour about audio cables and audio jacks and so forth? As when I'm gainfully employed, I shall be replacing my guitar's output jacks to the Pure Tone full contact ones and guitar cables from Runaway Audio. No one, he's not sponsored by them.
Yeah, it'd be great. Someone puts it into the second hour and we vote it up a little bit. I'm happy to talk about cables. There's probably a lot of us can wax on for at least an hour about cables. Next question.
Steve Fisher in Pittsburgh says, outputting ProRes 422 LT from compressor, and the files work great on HyperDeck Mini playback. Today I use the same processes, but the files have no audio. Source files have audio for sure. Any idea? HyperDeck set to playback in ProRes 422 LT.
I don't know what would be causing that, but what I would say is that I have a setting in compressor that is set to, and you are doing it from compressor, so that's good. The main thing is make sure that everything is going through the exact same compressor route, and I wouldn't use the off-the-shelf one. So what I would do is set it all up, where it's forcing resolution, stereo, so if you use the regular one, the 422 LT from Apple in compressor, it has a lot of things that are open-ended. Oh, up to this many tracks, up to this resolution, up to these things. You want to take all that out. So you want to copy it, duplicate it inside a compressor, and then set everything, hard code everything to exactly what you want it to come out as. Make sure that it works in the HyperDeck and not have it open to following anything coming in. It is going to enforce whatever you send it, and you should have a better experience. Go ahead, Bill.
My whole Mac rig for audio and video works 99.9% of the time, but that 0.1% of the time, little anomalies do take place. And if ever I have a circumstance where I see video, but suddenly I don't hear audio, my go-to solution is just completely restart my computer, let it reboot from scratch. Mm-hmm. And a significant number of the times, whatever the little glitch was seems to solve itself in the reboot process. So just try that. It's cheap. You want to give it a shot.
Good, Courtney.
Make sure the new files that you're not getting the audio out don't have audio on tracks 3 and 4 instead, and nothing on 1 and 2, because that way the HyperDeck may not see them or monitor them.
And that's where a lot of times forcing things in the system, it'll just sum everything down to where it needs to go. Go ahead, Stuart.
Variation on what Courtney just said, but just make sure that what you're feeding compressor, the timeline doesn't have those tracks muted.
Yep.
I know I've done it plenty of times. We all have.
He said he heard it in the file, so that's where it could be sitting.
No, that was previous files. The way you said it is previous outputs worked, and then these ones didn't today. So
and it says source files have audio for sure. So the source. Oh, but maybe it's coming out. You're right. Or it could be again. It could be. I think grabbing on it. They're in deeper channels. I think that is what it really sounds like. Next question.
Leo Mendel in Penn in the UK here in the panel says, have an XR18 on one side of a room and the amp is 15 feet away. He can't easily run a cable between the two. Is there a wireless way to drive the amp and speakers?
And before we answer this, just for our producers, probably have a little bit of time. If you want to throw another couple of questions in there, we'll probably have a little more time till the end of the hour. Go ahead, Craig.
We have had success in some of the theater shows I've worked on. We did it for surround speakers, but using basically an in-ear monitor pack from a wired transmitter, sending out into a speaker, a self-powered speaker is what we used. So you can do it. The other option that I'd look at is if there's any way, if you can't run a cable directly to it, if there's any other infrastructure in the building where you could run something else, especially if there's a network already where you could use a Dante solution.
At a long run, I would be more apt to say, figure it out. I would figure out like the wireless. At 15 feet, you have to explain why you would. I mean, it adds so many variables for 15 feet. But anyway, go ahead, Leo.
The building is a grade something listed building. It has actually got cabling in the walls, but it's a library, so I can't actually add the cable, and it's their presentation room. I have got Cat 6 cabling at both points if I can do it over there, but the mixer is an XR18, and I don't know how to get it out from an 18 into there.
You could use an Avio on both ends. I'm just going to Dante between the two. You know, you could
So
use,
just-
you know, and just put it into the cat. Yep. I mean, that
Okay.
would, you'd have to have a switch there somewhere to develop it. It's not.
There is a switch. There's no problem about switches.
Yeah. So you could do Dante, just little Avios on either end.
Okay.
And then it would be wired and it would be clean and you'd be able to do lots of other things with it if you needed to. Oh, go ahead, Stuart.
Devil's advocate question. Can you move the mixer closer to the amp?
Yeah, but I think that
no is the answer to that. There's a production part, but we've moved the production because of it was one of those where the presentation point was the amplifier was right behind where they present, and it was causing no end of trouble of can you turn somebody up, can you turn somebody down? So we had to move everything over, but we just have to find that one connection back.
I thought that those Avios were goofy for years, and they're life-changing once I got used to them. We have like all of our HyperDecks have audio in and out, you know, going out. There's like 10 of them that are stacked up, and all of them have Avios just hanging out of them and Ethernet cables going into the system. And it's just, you know, it's just a great way to pass audio back and forth. And you can just, then you're in the Dante world, you can sit there and route things and do whatever else you want in there as well. So I think it's, and they're super stable. Courtney?
If you're sending line level or unbalanced line level audio, you might, sorry, let me just click on something over here. Look at a Balun. And if there are Ethernet cables that run through that are not really on a network, but just end-to-end Ethernet, you can use something like that to run audio over Ethernet cable that's already in the wall.
Next question.
Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, right back with he's noting a microphone here, AKG 1000 hanging module preamp, integrates a red tally light. It remains lit until the phantom power is removed. Is this the only way to toggle the LED off?
Yeah, I think that it is designed to make sure that you know that there's power on it. So it's gonna. I think that typically the 48 volt is tied into the LED. so it's, you know, like when it's on. And so I don't think there's any way to turn it off. You can get little stickers. David Brady, I don't know where I have them, but David Brady recommended these great little stickers that you put over top of LED lights. And I bought a little pack of them. I haven't used them yet, but they sit in a little pack. And I'm like, someday I'm going to start putting these on top of all my LED lights. So you can get, there's actually little stickers that you can buy on Amazon for like $8, the whole pack of them of different sizes that you just put over top of your LED lights. Next question. Oh, Stuart, sorry. Stuart.
Just pointing out that it's not a tally light. It's a phantom power on indicator.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael is up next. He says, in many 80s era tracks, and he notes Boy in the Bubble by Paul Simon, they use a thick reverb on the kicker toms in the intro and let the reverb tail out before hitting the listener again. What parameters make this reverb sound thicker?
Good, Michael.
Time and shape. And one of the best ones to look up is the Lexicon 480. This was ubiquitous and used totally in the 80s to get that type of sound that you're looking for. Relab Development, they have a plugin called the LX480, and they have a light version of the plugin, which is very economical that you can get. If you want the full one, it's on sale now for $199.
Great answer. Go ahead, Greg.
One thing that they do for a number of different tracks in studio is have multiple reverbs on the same instrument, just to get the sweet spot of each different reverb to ring the way they want it, and then they can manipulate it depending on where it is in the track. But sometimes they actually layer multiple different reverbs on, in this case, the snare or whatever.
Next question.
Danny Laws framing this, not me. He says there are opinions that Pro Tools stock plugins are not as good or effective as Waves plugins. So it's a religious argument. Really? He's curious about whether that's true or not.
I think that the stock ones are, I mean, I haven't used the Pro Tool ones for a long time, or the Waves ones. I'm mostly using Logic at this point and kind of live in that world with a different set of them. But in the past, I've they're very serviceable. I think that a lot of times manufacturers or software companies, they have to be careful. They don't actually try to eat all of their suppliers up. Some don't. they want to make sure that when you buy the product, you can do all the things, and so they have lots of plugins that will make sure that they're relatively full featured. But going after every person that might develop for their software is not a great way to have people develop for their software. So a lot of times their stuff might not be quite as good as some of the more specialty stuff where someone's focusing on it and charging you accordingly. Then they want you to go out and buy stuff rather than if a manufacturer kills off their entire plugin ecosystem, it actually makes it harder. So I would expect the Pro Tools ones to be very, very serviceable and good in most cases, but probably they're not trying to go after everybody who builds a great idea for their platform. They want to have that ecosystem be successful. Next question.
Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania says end address microphones seem to be have obvious usability advantages over side address mics. Are side address mics designed only to fit larger capsules, or are there use cases where one reaches for the side address mic for an orientation advantage?
Go ahead, Courtney.
It depends. Usually end address microphones you will find in smaller diaphragm capsules you'll find that have an interference tube. So it depends on that interference tube in front of the capsule itself. So it has to be end address, and you have to be able to aim it. So it gives you directionality that you can aim and tell where it's aiming. As far as vocal microphones like this one that are side address. I like a side address because I can have it come in sideways and stay out of the frame and still have the capsule rotate it so that the capsule is pointing directly at my mouth and not have to deal with 6 inches of microphone that sticks out over my keyboard gets in the way of my hands. So it has that application advantage. And most large diaphragm condensers are usually side address, and you find most dynamic microphones are mostly end address.
Good, Bill.
As a guy who's done 500 plus voiceovers, normally on large diaphragm condensers, for me, something in front of me means that my maximum signal is going to be oriented straight ahead. Any move off of that is a technique I use to change the timbre or the amount of voiceover going into that. And I lean forward and back. So if I'm whispering or something like that, I move back and forth a lot. So that is my preferred orientation. What that does not work for is anything on camera, because obviously there's a microphone literally right in front of my mouth. So side address is about 90% of the mics I've used over the course of a voiceover career. I would think it would drop down to 10 or 15 if I had done mostly on camera stuff over my career. So it's horses for courses.
Yeah, the funniest side address one, not the funny, is the most interesting was the BBC's World Service had a ribbon mic that had been there for years, and probably 50 years when I visited. And they would do interviews. So they, on either side of the table, they'd have a ribbon mics hanging between two people. And it sounded amazing. And it was this, and they had it there for, again, 40, 50 years when I visited. And I asked, I think I might have told the story before, but I asked, so what happens if one person speaks louder than the other? And the answer was, move the table. Just move the table away from the one that's speaking louder. And they evidently, that's the way they adjust it. All right, next question.
Nathan GS in Singapore says, any thoughts on using the PreSonus Revelator as an audio interface?
Go ahead, Michael.
Yes, it's a fine interface, and you do fine with it. This is one of the budget interfaces, and you can go to gearspace.com and totally geek out and read all the reviews of all the different interfaces. But PreSonus, when they first started out, they had a little problem with their drivers. Now I'm talking totally years ago. Now they're fine. But if you can go Apogee, the Apogee Duet is some more dollars spent, but I think you'd be very happy with the converters from Apogee Digital.
Yeah, I have one here. I just got one, and I think the biggest complaint I have with it so far is just that I installed the wrong software, because that's like they guide you through this whole thing, and I end up with like a studio software instead of the Revelator software, and I was like, none of the tools that I saw are here. So finding it, they kind of have that typical problem of the user experience of installing it is not very good. I'm getting it because, I have right now my interface is a Sound Devices Scorpio, which is insane and I want to use it in other things. And so I've been trying to find something that would be, and I have other things like mixed pre's, but I want to find something I can send to people that doesn't cost quite as much, and that we have some control over, and from a PC, because we send out our interfaces with a PC, or Mac Mini actually. And so I got it as a test, and it looks really cool when some of the other folks on our panel use it, but I still haven't gotten all the software put together because it's not clear. All right, next question.
Peter Moore in Auckland, New Zealand is back, and he says, given that our modern mixing consoles have come such a long way, is it really necessary these days to have to use a DI box, direct inject box, for guitars or keyboard synths? I know my Behringer Xenix I bought last year recommends a DI box.
Go ahead, Stuart.
I'm going to give you another name for the DI box, which is actually what it does. It's a preamp to line level for a musical instrument. So yes, you still need them to bring your signal up to a level that the mixer can actually use.
Good, Courtney.
Depends on the musician. There's a lot of musicians that love the sound of their, Stratocaster coming out of their 10-inch Marshall amp, and you have to put a microphone on it because that's the sound that's their sound. And a DI box, eliminates that air gap. But there's a lot of digital mixing panels with digital modeling in them that that can actually use digital signal processing to model a specific amplifier and microphone combination. So DI box can get you back to that sound, but it takes a lot of trouble and a lot of experimentation to achieve that perfect sound.
Next question.
Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania says, shotgun angle from the top versus from the bottom. Top-down position seems to have proximity advantages for video. Bottom-up seems preferred for voiceover. Advantages or challenges for side angles.
Go ahead, Bill.
We could talk about this for a while. So a couple of things to think about. First of all, shotgun is the worst name for anything because they don't act like shotguns. But in this particular case, in terms of the angle of a microphone, it is useful to think about a line going out on the axis of the microphone, because shotgun mics or hypercardioids, tight pattern mics, tend to pick up reflections easily. The reason you will think that a top-down mic sounds a little more present and has proximity effect is because that mic is pointing past your voice or whatever is making the sound to the floor, and it's getting a very short reflection. You turn that same microphone around in a building with 10-foot ceilings, and any reflections coming back are way far away, and you're going to have less proximity on that. So it's a process of understanding what's behind where you're pointing any directional microphone. If you've got airplanes flying over his head, you're not going to use an up angle. You're going to use a down angle to suppress that. If you've got a really messy floor circumstance, it's really hard and you're getting bad reflections off of that, move to the side. And in terms of the side, it's just a process of your talent. If you want a particular sound, may have to work a little different, understanding that their direct sound is going to come by moving toward the microphone, and they're always getting a little tiny bit of off axis, even if it's close, and that distance will be more important than the axis.
Go ahead, Stuart.
For video production, cinema production, it's very rare for the shotgun or the hypercardioid mic to be the primary microphone. Just think all the times that you're hearing dialogue, generally you're hearing it from a lavalier or a lapel mic, often sewn into the clothing or sewn into a wig. The shotgun mic, it's not a great solution, but sometimes it's the only solution. But we don't use them very often.
And when I'm doing interviews, I prefer shotgun mics over a lot of other things. I just don't like to see them, and then you have people coming in. And for me, the big thing is that I take a C-stand and I hang it over the person's head. I get that shotgun about a foot to a foot and a half in front of the person, and it is. I come down until I can see it, and then I pull back up again, so it's just out of my shot there, and I point it right at the lower part of the sternum, and I find that I get great audio that way. Go ahead, Courtney, real quick, and we'll go to the next one. I got a heart out.
Okay, I like underneath. It sounds better. Uses the body to block ambient sounds. If it's overhead, here's more 360-degree sound around you, and you get resonance coming out of your nostrils if you're underneath. That's the quick version.
Yeah, and I actually often will use both. If I've got budget, I'll have mics coming in from both directions just to save myself one way or the other. I just pick the best one. Next, last question, real quick.
Douglas Carmichael, I've heard of live engineers using universal audio plugins at front of house. How would they bring them in and out of a digital console without Dante or SoundGrid support on the UAD side? Would you use a UAD accelerator and a native host application?
Stumped us.
No,
I don't have an answer.
You can use something like Universal Audio Apollo Solo to run the plugins through a computer directly into it as just a chain add.
There you go. Very good. All right. Well done. Lots of great questions. Thank you to the producers for a fine set of questions to discuss, and thanks to the panelists for tons of great answers, as always. I swear I've learned more in the last year and a half than I think ever about so many different things. It's amazing. So thank you. And now we're going to jump into the after show. Tomorrow we're going to talk about lower thirds. So we're just going to go through them and look at them and tear them apart. And so if you have things that you want to think about or questions about that, think about that. It's going to be, we're getting ready for Office Hours 2.0 and working on the graphics. And so as a result, we're going to talk about lower thirds and super sources on Wednesdays to kind of get ready for that. All right. Jumping into After Hours. See you there.